Welcome to this module. In the last module, we added image upload. Now it's time to work more with our general post data again. Whilst we worked with the files in the last module, now I want to handle pagination, which means I want to control that we don't always display all posts, but that we can switch between different pages, so between different sets of posts. And we only display 2 posts on the first page, 2 posts on the second page, 2 posts on the third page, and we can switch between these pages to load the appropriate post for each page. That's a common pattern because we don't want to download all posts by default, because if we have more posts in our database, then we would download a lot of data, which would not only mean that we transfer more data over the wire, it would also mean that we display a lot of data, which might be hard to navigate through for the user. So let's add pagination in this module. So here's our application as it looks like right now. We got all the posts on the first page, and of course that's no problem for free posts. I will still already implement pagination because I can also demonstrate it with free posts. It will work the same no matter how many posts we have. But we will of course typically use that with more posts. Though the way we implement pagination will give the user the flexibility to decide how many posts he wants to display on a given page. And for that, I will actually use a special component provided by Angular Material. If we visit material.angular.com, under Components at the very bottom, we find that Paginator. It's a part of that data table set, but it's actually usable without the data table. The Paginator looks like this. We will be able to choose how many items we want to display on a given page, and we can then switch between these pages. So now we're viewing the items 11 to 20, for example. Now we can use that component in our Angular application, and it will actually emit an event whenever we switch the page or the amount of items on a page. And we can listen to that event which it emits and then update the posts we display on the page. So let's do that. Let's add this component to our Angular application. For that, I first of all will go to my app module, and there we need to import it from @Angular Material. There I will add the mat Paginator module. After adding it here, I'll take this item or this class and go down to the imports array in that same module, and there I will also add it. Now we're unlocking it, and now we can use that Paginator in our Angular app. And I want to use it in my post list component, of course. There, below the mat accordion, we can now add mat Paginator, like this. Opening and closing tag. Now that mat Paginator needs some configuration, because if I just add it like this and I go back to my app, well, then we see it here with some default settings. I want to be able to customize the amount of pages or items we fetch per page, and also define on which page we currently are, and so on. So what I'll do is, I will set a couple of properties. The first property, for example, is the length property. Length simply allows us to define how many items we have in total. And later we will of course dynamically fetch this from the backend. For now I will go to the post list component and add a new property. A public property, which I'll name total posts. And I'll set this to a value of 10 for now, a dummy value, of course. So this is the total amount of posts I have, and I will bind length to it by wrapping it in square brackets and binding it to total posts, like that. Now with that, if we save that and we go back, we already see we now got 10 posts registered here. Of course, that's just a dummy value, but this is how this will work. We can also set up which page we're currently on by binding the page size property. Now, page size also has to be bound to a number, so I will add a new public property, which I'll name posts per page, because that is the page size. How many items do we want to have on a given page? And I'll set this to 5 by default, or let's say 2 maybe, because we only have 3. So now I pass that value as a value we bind to here with page size. I also want to add a drop-down where the user can choose how many items he wants to see on a given page. For that, we add another public property, page size options maybe, the name is up to you. And this should be an array of the options, so of numbers, like 1, 2, 5, and 10. Now the user would be able to choose between 1, 2, 5, and 10 items per page. We bind that to another property on Paginator, page size options. There we pass our page size options property defined in our component. With that saved, if we go back, our dummy Paginator has all these features. Of course, using it doesn't do anything yet. For that, we need to listen to an event, and that event is emitted whenever we change the amount of items per page or the current page. And that event is the page event. Here, I want to call a method which I'll call onChangedPage, and I will forward the event object this Angular material Paginator gives me. I can access it with $event as always, and this will now call this method whenever we switch the page, and it will give me some information about that page event. So with that, let's go to the post list component, and there I will add this onChangedPage method, and there I know I get some page data, which will be of type page event. And page event is a type which needs to be imported from @Angular material. So make sure to add this import at the top. Page event is just an object holding some data about the current page, and we can simply log it to the console to see what's inside of it. With that, if we save that one more time, if I switch the page, we get an object with information about the current max number of items known by our Paginator. We get information about the current page index, and this starts at 0. So for page 2, this is 1. We get information about the current page size selected in the dropdown. And we get the last page's index. And since we are on page 2 and we start at an index of 0, the last page is page 1 with an index of 0. This is the data we get also for the case that we changed the selected page size. And now we can use that data to narrow down the amount of items we retrieve from the backend. This of course means we have to do some work on the backend. Before I do that though, I want to add some spacing between the Paginator and my accordion so that we have this drop shadow at the bottom again. And I will simply do that by taking my Paginator selector, Paginator here, and going to the CSS file, and there I will simply add Paginator as a CSS selector and add a margin top of, let's say, 1 rem, which by default should be 16 pixels. So with that out of the way, this error here should also disappear. Yeah, now it's gone. So now with that out of the way, we can move forward and have a look at the backend and see what we need to adjust there to add pagination. So with the Paginator added, in order for it to do something, I need to go to the backend. And there in my app.js file, or in the posts.js file I mean, where we have the route for fetching all posts, this route here, there we now need to implement pagination. And I will do this with the help of so-called query parameters. These are optional parameters, pieces of information you can add to your URL. You add them at the end of the URL, separated from your domain and path by a question mark. And you can easily retrieve them on the backend in your Express app by accessing request and there the query object. This will hold the parsed query parameter information. I can show you how this works. Let's console log request query to see what's inside there. Let's save that, and our backend will restart therefore. And let's open a new tab. And there I will enter localhost 3000/API/posts, which is our posts route, and then question mark, and then here, for example, page size equals 2 and page equals 1. And this is now totally up to you. You could also have pages here, any names you want, or add another parameter, something equals cool, whatever you want. You separate them, all the query parameters, from the path with this question mark, and then the individual query parameter pairs, where you have a name and a value separated by an equal, These pairs are then separated by an and sign, by an ampersand. If I now hit enter, we actually retrieve all posts. So we still reach that route and it works as before. But in the log of our server, we actually see this object here. Page size 2, page 1, something cool. So this is the data we now retrieved because we sent the request with these query parameters added. So they're conveniently parsed for us. And this, of course, allows us to use them to change our Mongoose query to narrow down which amount of posts we fetch. And this can be done very easily. First of all, let's retrieve that data from the query object. So we got the page size, and we can get it from request, query, page size, all lowercase. Though that, of course, is up to you. You define which kind of query parameters you accept in your API. Another feature or value I want to extract is the current page, and I get this from request query page. Again, these names here at the end are totally up to you. You define what you want to extract, and I'm simply creating an API which is able to work with these query parameters. And now again, we want to adjust our Mongoose query. The cool thing is, if we don't pass page size and page, then page size and current page will simply be undefined. So we can check whether page size and current page are not undefined. So we'll only make it into this if block if they are both set, if they both contain values. To be precise, if they contain valid values. Because if page size or current page would be 0, it would also be treated as invalid, but that is actually the behavior I want. So now we can construct two different queries. This one to fetch all posts, and then an adjusted one to only fetch a selected slice of posts for a given page. For this, I'll create a new constant and I'll name it post query. Because the cool thing about Mongoose is you can actually structure queries by chaining multiple query methods, which will narrow down your query. And by default, my post query is post find. So this query down there. It will not get executed immediately. It will only get executed as soon as we call then. And therefore, this will not execute it. So we can now use post query down there to then execute it. But we actually want to manipulate it here in case we got a page size and a current page. And there we can use two useful methods provided by Mongoose. The first one is the skip method. This means we will not retrieve all elements we find, not all posts, but we will skip the first n posts. So you add page size times current page here. Or to be precise, current page plus 1. Because if you are on page 2, then you want to skip all items that were displayed on page 1, right? And the items displayed on page 1 are the page size. So if you are displaying 10 items per page, you want to skip 10 items because you are on page 2. So you want to display page size 10 times current page 2, minus 1. So 2 minus 1 is 1, of course. 10 times 1 would be 10, so we would skip 10 items. If we are on page 3, then we want to skip 20 items, the items of the first 2 pages. So if the page size is 10, we have 10 times 3 minus 1 is 20. Now that's giving us, or that's skipping the previous pages. We also want to narrow down the amount of documents we retrieve for the current page. And we do that by chaining another method, the limit method. This limits the amount of documents we return. And here we simply pass page size. Because if we got 10 items per page, then we want to limit the query to only return 10 items. Now important, this will still execute a query on all elements in the database. This is how it works. So for very large data sets, this could be inefficient, and a link with a detailed discussion and some possible workarounds can be found in the last lecture of this module. This is a great approach for many use cases though, and you'll need to have an extremely large database to run into any issues here. So this is definitely a fine approach and the approach we will use in this course, but I want to make you aware of this alternative, again, which you find in the last lecture of this module. So now we get the adjusted post query, and then we again execute it. Now with this setup, let's save this and therefore update or restart our server. And now here, with page size set to 2 and page set to 1, let's rerun this query. And if I do that, I actually get an error here. Now that error is thrown because we're using an invalid type. Limit field must be numeric. Now by default, and that's important, if you're extracting something from these query parameters, it'll always be a string. Because it's coming from the URL, it's treated as text. We need to work with numbers here though, and to convert this to numbers, we can simply add a plus in front of both these statements here. With that, if we restart the server, now we can rerun that query, and you see indeed we got less posts here. And if I bump my current page up to 2 now, 2, then we only got 1 post because we are fetching 2 posts per page and we are on page 2. If we have 3 posts in total, that means on page 2 is only 1 post because the first 2 posts were on page 1. So that's the backend logic. The next step is to connect Angular to that and to use these query parameters to only fetch the data we need on the front end. So let's connect Angular to our new backend or to our updated backend. We are fetching posts in PostList component here with getPosts. And therefore, we have to go to the service, to this getPosts method and work on that. Here on this URL, we should attach our query parameters. For that, I'll create a new constant here, name it query params, the name is up to you, and turn this into a template expression. We have 2 backticks. Important. These are not single quotation marks, these are backticks. That's a special JavaScript feature which allows us to dynamically add values into a normal string. So here I want to create my query params by first of all adding that question mark, which separates the other URL from my query parameters, and then the query parameters I want to pass on to the backend. And here we have to make sure we get the naming right. If on the backend we are accepting page size and page written exactly like this, then we should also pass query parameters with these names. So page size and page. So back in the service here, I'm setting up page size, which is equal to a value I need to get here as an argument. So there I want to get my posts per page. You can name this however you want, and this will be a number. And I want to get my current page, which will also be a number. And now I will use posts per page here. And now that's a feature provided by this expression, by this template literal syntax here. We can add a $sign and 2 curly braces. And in there I add posts per page. And then also the other parameter with the end sign that's separating the pairs of query params. Here we got page, which is equal to, again, using that dynamic value injection here, which is equal to the current page, this argument we're getting here. Now with that, we're constructing the query params. We now simply add them to the end of our URL plus query params like this. And now we send an updated request. This of course means that we need to send the right data from within our post list component. So back to that post list component, here in getPosts, we should actually send this posts per page, so this public property we added here. And as a second value, well, I want to start on page 1, so I will simply send a 1 as a value here. Whoops, and that's when this too much. So now we got this post per page and 1 as our current page. This is now fetching the post for page 1. And if we go back to our application, we already see, whatever we do here doesn't matter right now, we already see we only got 2 posts here, even though we have 3 in total. So we're getting there. Of course, we now need to also refetch posts if we change pagination. So if we go to page 2, for example, I simply want to execute this line of code again, but I actually want to replace these values we pass as arguments with the values I get from my page data. To be precise, I want to store that data in properties of my component. So we got posts per page. I also want to have my current page here, which is 1 initially. So now we can use that current page here in ng-on-init, this current page. And I can set it here in onChangedPage. This current page is page data, so that argument we're getting. And there we have the page index. Just keep in mind, we have to add 1 here because this index starts at 0. But on our backend, we're working with 1, 2, and so on. So we're starting at 1. And you could change everything to start at 0, but I want to start or work with that 1 based index. So that's the first part. But I also want to store my page size or posts per page property as it is in my component. And that will be page data and then page size as selected by the user in the dropdown. And now that's updating the values. I of course now also want to use them here. I'm already using this post per page, and here I will use this current page. And now with that, if I save that and I go back, I can go to page 2, and now we got that 1 post on page 2. And I can go back. And if I change this to 5, we see them all. If I change that to 1, we only see 1 post per page. And yes, we can go through too many pages. That's one issue we have. And we're also not displaying the right amount of posts here. And additionally, we of course also have the problem that if we delete a post here, well, then we would not update our pagination correctly, or we would run into problems here. I actually want to refetch posts when we do that. So these are all things we'll work on in the next lectures. So let's continue implementing pagination on the front end. So we got a couple of things I want to improve. And one thing I actually want to improve first is I want to show a spinner whenever we are changing the page. We already got the isLoading property, which we are using in the template to display a spinner. So we'll just reuse that. In PostList component, whenever we are changing the page, I will set loading to true, and we're setting it back to false automatically once we got updated posts. So this is now showing a spinner. I also want to make sure that the Paginator is only shown if we show the accordion, because if we got no posts, then there's no reason to show the Paginator. I also want to show it whilst we are loading though, so we'll copy the entire ngIf clause, but then I will add it here. I will remove that isLoading condition because I want to show it all the time. I want to update it though to only show it if we got more than 0 posts, but also whilst we are loading. So with that in place, if we go back, you can see that in action. We got the spinner here. Now it's time to work on these other issues. And one of them, of course, is that I also want to know how many posts we have in total. Now that is something we can find out on the backend. Here, where we are fetching all the posts, we also can find out which posts or how many posts we have. And for that, we can combine multiple different queries. Thus far, we have one query, which we narrowed down. Now here, where we got the documents, I don't want to create the response yet. Instead, I will return another query, which will be executed. I will return post count, where find finds all results. Count will just count them and return that number. And we don't need to change then here. If we return it in a then block, it will basically create a new promise and listen to its result automatically. And we can simply chain then here, therefore. And now we're chaining multiple then calls on the query. And here I know I will get my count, and here I then want to create my response. So first I'm fetching all the posts, and then I'm issuing another query where I get the count, and then here I have the count. Now, one thing, the documents cannot be used in this then block because they're an argument in this function passed to the first then block. To still use them in the second, I will store them in a variable. So at the beginning, above all my then blocks, I'll create a new variable, posts, or maybe fetched posts. It's undefined initially, and I'll assign documents as a value here in the first then block. We can then use fetch posts down there. So now we're returning the fetched posts, but now I also want to return a new piece of information, my max posts. You can name this however you want, of course, which is my count. So the number of posts we have in the database in total. With that, we're returning this new piece of information to the front end. There we now have to use it. And in the posts service where we get all the posts, this means we have to update the type of data we get back from the backend. We don't just have a message in posts, we also have that new max posts property. And that will be of type number. So now we got that too. Now, of course, this means we have to adjust our logic here, where we transform the posts. We don't just want to pass on the transformed post array. Instead, we want to pass on an object which contains both the updated post array, where all the posts have an ID without an underscore, and the maximum amount of posts. So here in map, I will actually return a JavaScript object which has a posts property. Let's also close the object down there. But besides that posts property, it also has a max posts property, which simply takes the data from post data max posts. So now we're returning this object with the posts and the max posts, all data from our database and from our backend, therefore. Now here in the subscribe method, we therefore no longer get the transformed posts, but the transformed post data, you could say. And that object will have a posts property which holds the posts, but it will also hold some information about our maximum amount of posts. And I want to use that too, of course. Here, where I emit data, I no longer just want to pass on an array of posts, so I will change the generic type of my subject, because it should now be a JavaScript object which has a posts property, which is an array of posts. But I also want to have a second property, which is, let's say, post count, which is a number. So I just updated the type of data our subject yields. For our subject to yield that updated data, I need to go down there where I call next. And instead of just passing a copy of the array, I will pass a JavaScript object which has a posts property which holds this copy of posts. And it will have a post count property which holds my transformed post data max posts value. So now this is the object I'm emitting. This is now holding both the posts and the post count, and we can use this in Angular. Now we got a couple of errors to fix in this file, therefore, and let's do that and all the connecting Angular to this logic stuff in the next lectures. So let's start by fixing these errors. We got these errors because we got other parts in our posts service where we actually try to pass this updated array of posts back to our components. Now we don't really need to do this here, and I mentioned this earlier. Since we navigate to our post list component from another component, we are guaranteed to reload that post list component. Therefore, ng-on-init will execute and will fetch new posts anyways. So now we can go to post service and simply remove everything but that navigation action in the add post method. And the same in the update post method. It was nice to learn how this works, but it's now not required anymore because, again, we go to a page where we fetch the latest version anyways. For deleting, it's a bit different. We do that from the list of posts, and therefore we actually will delete a post which we just were able to see. Hence, we definitely need to refetch data here. And the most elegant way of doing this is to entirely remove the subscribe method here and simply return this HTTP call or this configured HTTP call, and then subscribe in the post list component here in onDelete. There we now get that observable and we can therefore subscribe to it. And here we will actually get back, or we'll be able to react to the response, which is executed whenever the post was deleted. And here I simply want to execute this posts service get posts to refetch my posts. This of course means here I again need to pass my current page size, so per posts per page, and my current page, but that's all data we have in this component. So now we're fetching new posts once we successfully deleted a post. And this is a great step forward. I, of course, now also want to show a loading spinner once we start this deletion process. Now we're not done yet though. We got an error up here where we do subscribe to our subject. And here we're still waiting for data, which is an array of posts. But since we just updated our subject, we're actually getting back a JavaScript object now. An object with a post property and a post count property. Therefore, in the post list component, I will rename the argument to post data because this now seems to be more appropriate. It's more than just a post. And the type will be a JavaScript object which has a posts property which is of type post array and which also has a post count property as defined here. Post count has to be the same name. So here we got the post count property which will be a number. And this means down there where we store the posts, I will store post data posts. And with that in place, we got the errors removed. Now let's also use that post count then. We got our total posts property here already. And I will set this to 0 initially now. And here I will then set this total posts equal to post count because we now really got that information. Excuse me, to post data post count because we now really got that information from our backend. And now with that added, let's go back. Let's reload our application. And it's again failing on the backend. Let's see what's wrong. Document is not defined. So this seems to be just a typo in the posts.js file. Yeah, in my first then query, I'm trying to store document in fetched posts, but it's documents. So let's add a S there, restart the server, reload the Angular app. Now this looks better. Now you see we're displaying 1 and 2, so 1 to 2 posts of free. And if I go to the last page, we're displaying 3 of free. If I go to 5, then we're displaying them all free. Now we only got 1. And if I, let's say, take 2 for the first page, and I delete one of them, then it correctly updates, and now we only got 2 total posts. I can't switch between pages, and it's showing these 2 posts. So this all seems to work now, and with that, we got Pagination implemented with the help of Angular and Mongoose Express.